My name is Dr. Robert Koffie. I'm a neurosurgeon and the CEO of Spine Capital. Today we have Dr. William Butler, who is a board-certified neurosurgeon and faculty at the Harvard Medical School and the Massachusetts General Hospital. And today we want to just do a deep dive, a conversation about his life, how he went into neurosurgery, some of the great things he's done, and his vision for the future of neurosurgery, business, entrepreneurship, and so forth. So Dr. Butler, welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure and an honor to be here.
Okay, so I want to start the conversation by just briefly touching on your background. So you went to college in UCLA and then medical school at Harvard Medical School and ended up doing neurosurgery at the Massachusetts General Hospital.
Yep.
And has stayed on as faculty for many years.
That's right. And it's a difficult set of training, difficult course, but I loved every moment of it. And I was always more for me to learn. There's always something harder for me to do. And there was always an important role for me to play in people's lives. And so that kept me running and working as hard as I could the whole time there. So it's an unforgiving field, but it's also a very rewarding field. And if you do your best and work your hardest and you're diligent, then you get good outcomes. The people recognize your effort and they write you thank you notes. I collect them and then I put them in shoe boxes, and the shoe boxes fill up and I send them to my mom when the shoe box fills up. So she has a closet full of them.
Oh, wow.
So it's hard work and it's unforgiving, but your efforts are recognized by people and it keeps you motivated and always trying to do your best.
Excellent. That's a really, really nice response. I want to double click on what you mentioned about your mom and sending shoe boxes with patients' notes. So why don't we start a little bit earlier? How was it like for you growing up and so forth?
Well, my parents met in Mexico. My dad was a graduate student in physics, and he had his own small airplane. So he flew the Americas. And then in one of these, he landed in Veracruz, Mexico, and went to the local square where there was a dance and met my grandfather and his daughters. And he asked my dad, would you like to dance with one of them? And he said, yes, the oldest, which was my mom. And it is said in the family that my dad flew, his plan was to go to Panama and back, but that somehow he packed a tuxedo. So he went to this dance in the town square in Mexico wearing a tuxedo. And he was supposed to fly to Panama and back, but then never went to Panama, stayed the rest of his time in Veracruz, and then returned to University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And then they were married the next year. And then my mom delivered me in Urbana-Champaign, so I'm a secret Midwesterner.
Wow.
Yeah, it was in December, and she'd never been anywhere out of a tropical climate, so she went back to Veracruz and stayed there till my dad finished his graduate school. So I grew my first few years of life in Veracruz, and then when he got his job after his graduate degree in Los Angeles, we moved and joined him. And I'd done first grade in Mexico, moved to LA, and I flunked first grade for not speaking English. Wow. And then my schooling ever since then has been in English.
Wow.
So I am like a cradle bilingual in two languages, but I use them asymmetrically.
Wow.
So English I learned in school, and Spanish I learned at home.
Wow. Wow. So how was it like in terms of the influence that you got from your parents and how that led to your career as it is now?
So one important thing is that my dad worked hard to learn Spanish. My mom worked hard to learn English. And then I was cradle bilingual. And so for a good amount of my time, I was more fully bilingually fluent than they were. So I learned early to see the other side. That was an important feature. The other important feature is there's a lot of richness and joy and imagination in the arts and literatures and in the movies of Mexico and Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that richness with me all the time growing up. And that was always a source of imagination, what is past the horizon. I always had that coming from that side. And then I have this Anglo-Irish name, and so I've always been able to be Joe Average American. And so I had like the best of both worlds in that sense.
Wow. And your dad studied physics.
Yeah, so he physics, and then he was a chief scientist at Hughes Radar.
Okay.
And so his jobs were secret, but I figured out enough that he was involved in the low observability project in making aircraft that you couldn't spot by radar. And so that he called it low observability. Today we call it stealth. So he was involved in that project.
In that
there.
project. Wow.
Yeah.
So that must have been an amazing period where you had your dad doing something very quantitative, physics
Yes.
and electronic related.
Yeah.
And that must have influenced what you ended up doing in college. Is that right?
Yes. There were a couple of things about it. One is that he loved his work, and he loved designing new things and loved seeing them become real. So he would do design, pencil and paper, and then he would disappear for months at a time to go to what I know now to have been Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, the self-testing ground. He'd be there for months and come back with sunburns from being outside where the aircraft were. And so then he had joy from creating things that weren't there, and that was influential in me, that if it's joyful for him, then I think it would be joyful for me to create things that don't exist yet.
Wow. And you carried that on with you. So now let's fast forward. So you're in UCLA. Did you already know at the time that you were interested in neurosurgery in college, or?
No. I have an uncle in Mexico who was a few years ahead of me. And in that culture, you go from high school to medical school. You don't do college. So he's a few years ahead of me. So then he went to medical school, and I was still in early high school, maybe in middle school, and he loved it. So he would come home and describe anatomy and physiology and medicine, and then I thought that it was just the most wonderful thing that you could merge scholarly work and science work and people work into one package. And he loved it, and I loved that too. And I said, that's a more complete way to develop yourself and to live than what my dad did, as good as that was. So my uncle was very influential in me. So he was the one person in the family unit who had gone into medicine, and he absolutely loved it, and he's still practicing today. So he was influential to me in that way. For a while I wanted to be a writer, but then I thought, I would ADD out too much, sitting in an office, typing away, not really living the real life, but writing about the real life.
Mm-hmm.
So what we want to do is have your body and your life be the pen, and the world be the paper that you write on.
Wow.
And it'd be more complete that way.
Wow. And so through the influence of your uncle, you got interested in medicine.
Yep.
And then you when you went to UCLA, you studied computer science.
No, I was biology major.
Biology
I was a
major.
biology major, but I always had a special interest in the computational mathematical side. But I was a biology major. So I have done startups, and I have written complex computer software, cloud deployed. One of which I was thinking about in your presentation earlier today, but I'm self-taught in computers. Never taken in my life a computer science class.
Wow, hence my mistake. I always assumed, based on all of the things you created, that your background in computer science was formal and through college and not. So self-taught, that's impressive. So fast track, you're at Harvard Medical School.
Because let me say something.
Okay.
Because people who I know who have gone and become computer scientists and math majors, they master a piece of the field, but then something I always thought about them is, okay, you've learned how to solve differential equations, you've learned how to program computers, but I want you to be ambitious with it. I want you to dream with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the engineering schools, they don't quite, I wanted more of that than is available in those formal trainings. So I said, you know what? I think what I need to know about computers, I can learn, but I can be in the world as a person and as a physician, learning better what are the problems that you want to solve.
So the fact that you did not have a formal computer science training may have been an advantage
in a weird way.
Wow.
Because then because the deep and important problems, sometimes you find that you need some technical training, but it's not as deep as you think. And that there is low-hanging fruit that you can see and identify in the world and make a difference with.
Wow.
In a way that you're self-taught to do that.
Fast forward to medical school. You're at Harvard Medical School in Boston. It's cold. There are a lot of very smart people around. You're from California. You miss your parents probably. Tell me about how that was like for you.
So I had gone to UCLA for college, but I had lived at home, and I took the bus every day. So then this medical school was my first experience not living in a home, parental home.
Mm-hmm.
So then that was hard. New England's a different culture than California, and that was hard as well. But by then I had wanted to be a doctor so badly that it kind of didn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to kind of, whatever hardship, study, this, that you gave for me, I could do it.
So you survived the Boston winters.
Yeah.
So much that you'd wanted to stay there for 10, 20, 30 years.
And then between my third and fourth years of medical school, I had one problem is I wasn't sure what residency I wanted to go into. And two is I wanted to learn more about quantitative and mathematical techniques. And so I'd been a biology type major. And so I signed up to do a graduate degree program in biomathematics at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that I thought I could get a master's in a year, but it turned out that I spent most of that first year just doing undergraduate math requirements. And so by the time the year was up, I'd only done a few of the graduate level requirements. I could tell it was going to take me more time. And then I also found out that I wasn't really meant to be a math graduate student. So in that 1 year, when I was supposed to be studying math, which I was studying it, I took up parachuting and scuba diving, got my own equipment, and I needed to be more active, needed to be more physical than you can in a math graduate program. So I didn't finish that. So I went back and finished my fourth year of medical school and applied in that interval for my residency.
So even in medical school, your approach to your career and your future was not traditional.
Kind of, in a way, yeah.
You took a break, explored an area that most medical students were not exploring. And even while you're in a math program, you were doing other things that were not, you wouldn't expect a math graduate
No,
student to be doing.
no, because if you're in math graduate school, you're in the basement, dank place, um, and it didn't work for me.
It didn't
I
work.
needed to be outside. Took up parachuting, took up scuba diving, got a master scuba diver certificate, had my own equipment, and
Yeah.
I needed like a complete way to live.
Right, right. That's very interesting because what I've found is people who are entrepreneurs inevitably, when put in structured programs, will find ways to not follow what the structure expects of them and find ways of creative outlets. And that's something it's very common among most entrepreneurs. Like they just, some of them, you have guys who quit college and go start companies, or guys who are supposed to be in programs that are not going to finish them or do something else while completing the program. So you had in your, almost, it seems like in your blood or your DNA, this drive to be entrepreneurial, and it was manifested not in starting companies but
Yes,
in doing something
yes.
else.
So I tell people that my first startup, I was about 7 years old, and we were living in Mexico, and the family there's in the liquor industry. They make a decent living with that, but I'd go to the town square and see little kids, peer age kids, who were shoe shine boys with wooden boxes with their shoe shine polishes and a little platform to put your shoe on, and then they would shine shoes and get paid for it, and they looked like they were having fun, and I wanted to do it too. So I started asking my mom and the uncles and aunts that I wanted to be a shoe shine boy, and they said, no, that's not the life that we have in mind for you. But I was stubborn, and I insisted until one day I woke up and there was a shoe shine box right there. And so I found a shoe polish and the rags to polish with, and I went to the town square and shined shoes.
Wow. As a 7-year-old,
Yeah,
you had that drive.
as a 7-year-old, yes.
Wow.
I shined shoes, and I thought it was the greatest thing ever. Except then summer ended, and then we moved back to LA and had to go back to school, and that was the end of that.
Wow. That's very interesting because it points out two things. Number one, naturally you gravitate to something that was interesting to you, regardless of what the social norms were supposed to be. You just found it fascinating. And the second point is that you had fun doing it.
Oh yeah, so it was great.
It was, it was interesting. You had fun doing it. And that, I think, in starting companies, you need those two things. You have
Yes.
to have a strong interest, and you have to have fun doing it.
Because it's very, our professional line of work is hard,
Mm-hmm.
and starting up new companies is very, very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And to excel at it, you have to love it. And if you love it, then the passion comes out. Then you find ways to get things to work when it's really should be very difficult to do. And so then the passion and the love of it helps you get past obstacles that would be hard for people to do, but you think it's fun.
Right. You think is fun. And so then with that framework, even as a 7-year-old growing up and going through all of these things, having that entrepreneurial drive, some might say neurosurgery training is so consuming that it will not be the best place for an entrepreneur to take the next step as a doctor.
Yeah.
So here you are, Harvard Medical School, about to finish your 4th year.
Yeah.
Why do you choose neurosurgery with that background?
Well, when you apply for residency, you're going to get asked that question, so you have an answer ready.
Mm-hmm.
And then the answer I would give today is different than the answer I gave then. The answer I would give today is that it's a great way to be alive 360 degrees. And what I mean by that, the field offers you a way to use visual spatial skills, to do performance, put everything on the line for one human at a time, and performing using your your whole sensorial capability, your whole motor system. You can do science. You can do administration. You can do clinical analysis. It's non-operative. You can do all of those things in one job. And so I thought, if you're going to be alive and you've been given this body and these faculties that you have, it's a great way to push them all out to the limit. And then that way you can make every single day count for something, for you and for someone else. And so if you ask me, if I were to say today, if I were applying today to neurosurgery, I would say that's why I want to do it. It's a great way to be alive 360. The flip side of that is that it can be unforgiving. As a necessary part of making every day count, is that it can be unforgiving. So I would give that answer today.
And so in the traditional neurosurgery training in your time, there were no work hour restrictions.
Correct, yeah.
It was a very tough training to become a neurosurgeon. And you trained at one of the best places in the world, at the Mass General, with a lot of the great neurosurgeons that were there at the time and so forth. How was that experience going through neurosurgery training?
I can say a couple of things. One is that by then I had wanted to do it so badly that anything that was put before me I could do, and it didn't matter. And I don't like getting up early in the morning, for example. I'm not a natural early morning riser, but if this is what needs to be done, then I'm stubborn enough to be able to do it.
To do it.
Now, the work hours things, I was on call every other night, and then when you're not on call, you still had to stay till 6, 7 p.m. And I had one experience in that led me to see that as being profoundly wrong, and it's the following. In that, one day I came in 6 a.m., rounded, work, many tasks to do, in and out of the operating room, patients in the emergency room, new patient consults, urgent things, 11 p.m., 12, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. You have to be ready, you have to be up by 6 a.m. Finally at 3:30 a.m., things are quiet, so I go lie down. My beeper goes off. Alert, motor vehicle accident, head injury, trauma coming in, due to arrive at 3:45. Okay. And then I get another one, 10 minutes later, alert is off, they died en route, not going to be there. And I thought, all right, I can take a nap. And the next day I felt terrible. Right. I had felt, all right, they had died en route. And then I thought to myself, I love this job. And if I feel that way, then the job is a problem. The hours are a problem. And it should be reformed.
Right.
So then I ended up being of the opinion that, okay, so you need to see a lot of pathology to learn the patterns and to learn the manual skills, but there needs to be structure, and there needs to be limits, and the training system we had then, I said, if I feel that way, others feel that way, we can't let that be.
Right. And as you know, there was a reform where the work hour restrictions were implemented. Some programs were not really adhering to them because of how much work needed to be done, how many patients needed to see. But to your point, I think even in my training, which may not have been as intense as yours, there were times when you felt like the patients are the reason why your life was miserable, so to speak, when you're actually taking call. And to have that switch turn, that you love this and that you're doing it to help these patients, I think is a driver that kept a lot of us going till the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so you finished neurosurgery residency. It was it 7 years for you or 6?
It was, for me, it was 7.5.
7.5. Okay, so long training, probably tiring, draining. then you're done with training. Were you still as excited with neurosurgery at the end as you were at the beginning, or did
Oh
something
yes,
change?
absolutely, absolutely, because absolutely, because you learn from those who teach you,
Mm-hmm.
and then your job as a student is to learn the best of them, and not learn not learn what's limited in them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have various teachers. So you have to learn judgment as to what's good and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn it from your teachers. You have to kind of sit back and be like skeptical and critical about them.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was putting together my own ideas on what were the best ways to be, and they would borrow from my different instructors. So I was looking forward to putting them into action, and so that to me was like an exciting thing. And then the other thing I learned is my steepest learning curve and my greatest tensions were my first 2, 3, 4 years after completing my residency.
Okay.
Because difficult manual tasks as a seventh year resident, I learned to do quickly
Mm-hmm.
if I had my attending there watching.
Mm-hmm.
And then a significantly simpler task on my own, having finished my program, I would sweat, wonder, and double, question myself and go over everything. And what used to be, to me, an easy, obvious problem became a difficult one my first few years. Because you had the assumption of personal responsibility
Right.
in an end-to-end sense was very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And my steepest learning curve, I think, was in my first few years after completion of residency.
Yeah, no, I felt exactly the same way after my training, because now it's all on you. You make every decision and you're in the OR. If there is bleeding, it's all on you to stop it. If there is a problem or complication, it's your fault. The responsibility and the growth in the first 2 to 3 years after finishing, even a 7-year residency, is quite
Yes,
high and
absolutely.
and so forth. Okay,
Yeah.
so so for most people in their careers, when you're done with neurosurgery residency, you have one of 3 paths. You can go into academic neurosurgery, which is you go into a university, you're a professor or an assistant professor, and you work with residents and train the next generation of neurosurgeons. And in that path, you can also do research as part of the whole thing. Or you can go into private practice where you start your own business, care for patients, and get revenues that way, and be involved in other business endeavors. Or you can be an employee of a hospital system and work for them. Those are usually the 3 paths that most neurosurgeons take. Your path was more academic, but not traditional, in that you founded some really important companies as a neurosurgeon in an academic environment where there are a lot of restrictions on intellectual property rights and so forth. And so I want you to tell us more about how that was like, starting your first company. How did the idea come in, and why did you feel it was necessary to take a path that was not the traditional academic path?
Well, it reflects failures on my part. And my first had wanted to run a traditional lab, or at least at the time I thought I wanted to. And so then I did my first NIH grant. And then for that grant, I had put together a computational system for single molecule resolution in fluorescent microscopy, because I thought that life forms weren't really beakers of chemicals with enzymes. They had structure, and that biochemistry was limited unless you could see the structure in cells, that you would never really get there. So I wanted to see the structure in living cells. So then I put together a system for computational resolution below the resolution of wavelength of light, using some computational methods, and then showed that it worked. And I showed that it worked using the kinocilium of the middle ear, because those are well known on the basis of electron microscopy. And so then I said, having done this, I'm going to wish to study the metabolism surrounding the cytoskeleton in smooth muscle cells. And then I submitted that and got very low score. And then
Meaning it wasn't funded.
yeah, it wasn't. Oh, it got a very low score.
Okay.
And then from reading the reviews, I didn't think they'd read it.
Wow.
And so I said, well, this is a waste. And perhaps in retrospect, I would have understood the game better. I said, this is a waste. I'm not going to spend my life just wasting away like this, trying to figure out why cells have structure and not have the reviewers read it. And I thought, and furthermore, I've been studying this very carefully and the reviewers haven't. I understand this better than they do.
Mm-hmm.
So who are they to review it anyway?
Right.
So that was a failure, and I gave that up. And it turns out in the year 2011, the Nobel Prize was given for single molecule resolution with fluorescence microscopy by a guy at Stanford called Warner, using a similar technique developed subsequently. Mm-hmm. And so in retrospect, I thought, I could have stayed with it, but I don't want to do that. And at the time I thought, I want to do something that completes me, that uses faculties and abilities that I have and that are holes in the field. But you can't do a grant proposal and send it to a reviewer because they're not accountable. So how can I hold them accountable? I know, by their pocketbook. So if I come up with something interesting and unique and novel, that if they reject it and they're wrong to, they pay money for, then they're hosed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, let me look for something. And so what could that be? So, and then in an academic practice, at the time I was on a flat salary. And so it didn't really matter how many cases I did, but they would still review them with you anyway, the administrative people. So one month they said, look, in December you did 16 cases. I said, no, I did 19. They said, no, you did 16. I said, no, I did 19. And then I thought, if they don't really know how many cases I did, then who knows what else is going on? So I said, let's come up with a computer-based way to solve this problem. And then in learning it, I learned that you have to, what they call code things, apply ICD and CPT codes. And then learning that more, I calculated about 10 to 30 code combinations that are feasible, and that's beyond a human scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, let's come up with a predictive way of predicting people's codes based on their patterns. And so then I came up with a way to use singular value decomposition to predict codes for an individual surgeon in an individual case given an individual history. And these days, you wouldn't use singular value decomposition, you would use a large language model. But those hadn't been invented yet. So then I invented a singular value decomposition to predict codes, and then those would get put onto a screen in an organized way. And then people would just sit down and do their case, click, 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 because it had already predicted, and then your invoice would go out. And so I thought, this is good, because it's administrative, that's boring. But on the other hand, I learned computer science, I learned numerical packages, and I learned how to put them together with a graphical user interface. And I taught myself the three-tier programming system, SQL in the background, Java in the application layer, and HTML and JavaScript for the client. And I taught myself that, and I said, let me do that. And so I went out and bought my own server, and I brought it into the hospital, and I found a room with an unused Ethernet line, and I plugged it in, and I plugged it into the power, and I started doing my billing that way. And then the hospital, some of the administrative people on the billing side, they gave me an FTP address to deposit claims to. So I started doing that. And then the other neurosurgeons noticed it, and they said, well, we don't want to do what we have to do, because ordinarily what they did is do an op note and send it to the coders, who would then code it and then send it back to them. So we want to do the way you're doing it. So I said, okay, fine. And so we started doing it. And then we found that in doing it this way, it would take 30 days off the lag time, between the interval between the time you did the service and the way went out. So it took off 30 days. And so when you went on the system, it was as if you got a 30-day bonus.
Wow.
Right? And so then my chairs, Dr. Zervis and Dr. Martuza, they fully supported it. And then the neurosurgery department billing became way more efficient than the rest of the hospital. And the rest of the hospital, the administrators said, hey, what are you guys doing different? And by then I had founded it called Square Knot, because everything you do is a process, and you have to close the loops. And what's the simplest and best knot you learn as a surgeon?
Square knot.
Square knot. Yeah. So I learned that. So I called it Square Knot. So the hospital said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And well, it's Square Knot. And so to me, it was a great experience, because I was able to come up with something innovative and computational, but it didn't depend on reviewers, because reviewers are limited. Right. It didn't depend on reviewers.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
Right.
You can think it's stupid, but it still puts money in your pocket. So shut up and go away. And so that's what it meant for me to do an entrepreneurial thing, is that you didn't need to depend on the approval of people who you didn't really think you needed to have their approval for you to proceed.
That's a very, very critical point, because in academics, your success, whether the papers you publish, the grants you get, the promotions you get in academics, is often dependent on reviewers.
Yep.
People who may not be as well informed as you are, don't have real skin in the game in terms of the success of the project. And yet this is the path the most academic, neurosurgeons or academics in general have to follow and please this reviewer. But you really reminiscent of what you were like as a 7-year-old, you were not interested in what other people thought, and you didn't want to be dependent on their reviews for your success. So you were able to jump in and do something that nobody had done before.
Yeah. And it's a great thing about being a neurosurgeon, is that what is a risk isn't really a risk at all, because it falls flat, splat. You're a neurosurgeon. You still make an honorable living by helping people who have difficult problems. So you didn't really take, in a very important sense, you didn't really take a risk.
Wow.
Right? And so the risk that you take is really the risk in not doing it.
And that's
leaving an open gap out there.
Wow.
The other thing is that about reviewers, my opinion is that people are brilliant, but they can be cowards. And so the reviewers, if you do something you think is meaningful and important, you get a bad review, decent chance they understood it, but it's not part of the accepted trend. And the deviation from the accepted trend is a natural human thing. It's a natural human fear. It's because teams are effective, right? Mm-hmm. And for a team to be effective, there needs to be unity of effort.
Right.
And if you deviate from the unity of effort, then it takes courage to do that, because sometimes the unity of effort is more effective in a different direction.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And someone needs to point that out. And the person who points it out needs to be willing to be not rewarded in the way that you think might be best, at least at that point in time.
And I bet that stifles innovation in the long term, because if you come with an incredibly new idea that's innovative, it will blow away ideas before, will not conform with things that are already published and accepted. And so the reviewer may not find that as something that they should accept for publication.
Yeah.
And therefore, innovative ideas are probably not going to be published because of this trend.
Yeah. But I'm not the first person, nor are you the first person to run into this. These things were foreseen by Plato, right? And so Plato pointed out the flaws of the peer review system, that it would favor the averageness, right? And things that were deviant would be unfavored. And that's by intention, because you need a structured system for finding and filtering out error. And so our peer review system, it does that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to take in mind that the cost that you pay for filtering out error is that better ways of doing things will get subject to the same negative pressure too.
Wow.
And so then people need to accept this as the way human societies work, and you need to be willing to just pay the price of taking risks on your own, and that's just who you are and what your job in life is.
Wow. I want to go back to one thing you said, which has to do with taking risks, and that, starting a company when you're not a neurosurgeon is risky. But you said, I'm a neurosurgeon. Even if it falls and fails, I'll still be able to do neurosurgery and help people. But it sounds to me like, at least among young neurosurgeons, we think of it very differently than you say, because we'll say, hey, if I start a company, that takes away from surgeries that I could be doing and making money. Therefore, I am risking losing income. So a lot of neurosurgeons will be stuck in hospital employed jobs where they can reliably make money in a linear way, but are not willing to be innovative and start companies that could, if they work, have exponential impacts.
Yeah. So when someone applies for neurosurgery residency in an academic-oriented program,
Mm-hmm.
they know that they need to say on their interview day, I want to run a lab.
Mm-hmm.
They know that. But is that really what an academic program is supposed to provide? I don't think so. And there's a sense in which, as a surgeon, you think of yourself as an active intervener in disease processes.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense you are, but you're only an active intervener in those disease processes that come to you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sense in which you're passive also, because the problems come to you already as problems. And the visions that you have for solving the problems are hour to hour, day to day, week to week, maybe month to month.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't really develop the opportunity and the sense of reward that comes from foreseeing a problem 5 years out, or 10 years out,
Right.
15 years out, or 20 years out. And so a laboratory can do that for you. You run an academic lab, you can be dissatisfied with how we deal with IDH wild-type gliomas and come up with a better way in a plan that takes a long time. But you also need far-sighted work in other areas in the lab to get the field to move forward. And some of those areas need complicated instrumentation. And the complicated instrumentation needs to be amortized. And so you need to find the economic value for it. And so what we, and what I, in my program I say, well, it doesn't matter if they want to do a lab. What matters is, are they interested in a 5, 10, 15-year vision for making our field in the world better? And that's what I say. That's what we want an academic program to do, is to find people who do that. And then to insist that it's in a lab setting is too narrow, and it doesn't maximize our capacity as an institution and as a training program to give the gift of these trainees to the world.
Wow, that's a very insightful point, because in general, most academic neurosurgery programs will say a successful product of their training is somebody who joins another academic neurosurgery program, has a lab, and works their way out from assistant professor, associate professor, becomes chairman, and retires doing that. I don't think they'll consider somebody who starts a company and invents square knots
Yeah.
and like makes
Yeah.
$1 billion doing it as successful in the traditional academic sense. And so with that framework in the background, obviously you didn't leave academic neurosurgery.
Right.
Thank God, because I
Right.
benefit a lot from your training. How did starting the company Square Knot, like from a business perspective, how did that play out for you in an environment where it was not the tradition?
So they don't make it easy for you in several respects. First of all, you have they own your intellectual property, as well they should, because you create it on their dime, right? So I'm working there. They're paying my salary, and if I come up with some idea, then it's theirs. That is as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you do a declaration and an invention disclosure, and if they wish to run with it and commercialize it, then they should get first shot. And if they do take and run with it, then for you as the inventor, it's ideal because you can continue doing what you're there to do anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? However, if they don't want to run with it, then one thing I learned through another painful experience is that your responsibility doesn't end there. And that painful experience was when I had just fairly graduated in about 1996. There was an MIT engineering student, Mike Timmons, who was introduced to me, said, "Hey, I want to do a master's thesis for my engineering degree.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any ideas?" And I said to him, "Yeah, I have an idea. Can you take what you see in the world in computer graphics and superimpose them in real time and create a synthetic perceptual field?" And he said, "Yeah." And he did it. And so that was his master's thesis, published, I think, in about 1997. And it was in synthetic perceptual field. So then I went to our hospital IP office. I said, "Well, we created this thing for a synthetic perceptual field, and I don't know, there may be a role for the market." And they said, "Well, what is the market for?" I said, "I don't know." They said, "Well, we're not interested." And so these days, it goes by the name of augmented reality. So that was invented there with me, an MIT student. It's in his MIT thesis. So when I came up with this next idea for Square Knot for predictive coding, I said, "Here's the idea. Do you guys want to run with it?" And they said, "Not really." I knew to ask the follow-up question: will you then relinquish it? Because they need to relinquish it, because then without it, you do not have the authority to raise money, because you don't own it.
Right.
You don't have the authority to hire people, raise money, whatever it is. So when the Square Knot idea came, I went and presented to them, and so university said no. I said, "Well, can you relinquish it?" So they relinquished it. And so to me, that meant that if you have an idea for how to make the world better, it depends on other people. But if your first people are not interested, doesn't really mean that you're done and you can walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And with, for example, this relinquishment is that if the hospital doesn't run with it, then you can't really walk away with it. If you have a good way of seeing the world that may be better, then you kind of develop a responsibility to see it through.
Right.
And that responsibility can even take on like an emotional side to it, that you owe it to see it through. And that emotional side becomes a passion and a stubbornness, and I will not get pushed off of that. And so that's kind of an essential thing that you develop.
Wow. So let's double click on that. So you are a young neurosurgeon. You come up with a brilliant idea that would change how healthcare billing is done in America, so to speak, because nobody was doing it anywhere else.
Right.
You had an intellectual property patent filed,
Yeah.
and your employer, who you said by your contract owns that idea,
Yeah.
decides that they don't want to push forward with it.
Right.
So in a way, their lack of interest was a positive thing for you,
Yes.
because then you get
Yes.
them to relinquish the
Yes.
ownership,
Yes.
and now you have the right to your own idea.
Yep.
After they say, oh, we don't want it,
Yeah.
right? So then now you have that. How do you, in that environment, you're still their employee, how do you take that to a company that will transform healthcare in that environment?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, one thing, my own money, bought my own server and plugged it into their Ethernet line, and then taught myself programming, and then you always need your friends and co-founders, and for many reasons. One is that the percent of times that startups succeed is very low, and the burden is too much for a person, and so you need people who are who understand you, and it can succeed and it can fail, and they're with you no matter what. The other thing that I needed back then was I went to my fellow attendings, and they had seen how our billing was better, and I said, well, I'd like to raise enough money to get this to work, and they said, well, we'll invest. So they each invested some, and that ended up being essential because of the endorsement that it represented, because you were being invested in by your colleagues who use the system, and what stronger endorsement of the idea?
Right.
There couldn't be any stronger
Right.
one. Yeah. So that ended up being essential, and that's another part about my department that has been, for my life, always essential, is that my colleagues there have always made me feel special, no matter what, and they did on that occasion as well when I was starting that. And so if you're in neurosurgery, we're all fallible, and so you have partners, and we're all fallible, and so you need your partner to see your oversight and to discreetly fill it in all the time, and vice versa. So these are surgeon-to-surgeon relationships that we develop that are hard for people not in the field to really understand, right? And so you have these relationships, we're all fallible, and you can always see something that someone else that you can improve on, and you just fix it discreetly. And so this was kind of in that vein. So my fellow attendings invested in it. And then when the hospital noticed that our billing was more efficient than everybody else's, they came and said, hey, what are you guys doing different? And at the time I thought, well, I will never sell this, even if I think that an algorithm can predict codes. If you're a urologist or whatever, a dermatologist, the world won't believe it until you show it to be true. And so then we entered into the agreement for the hospital then to work it out, and then they hired external software consultants. They hired a couple of computer scientists from Northeastern University, and then they rewrote everything from scratch, the source code from scratch, and they built it up, and they showed that it worked for all of Mass General, then they showed that it worked for all of Partners, and then they turned it into a successful company now called Codametrics that does the billing and charge capture for, I think, in excess at this time of 250 academic medical centers in the country.
Wow. And at the time of them coming back to you, they had already relinquished their
So I had
relinquished.
I had relinquished in the relinquishment letter was in the year 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And then the company Scornaut was founded in '04.
Mm-hmm.
And then since they had already relinquished it, and since I had other attendings as investors, it was only me that have squished me. But if a number of members of the neurosurgery faculty were investors, then they can't squish the entire department. Right. So I foresaw that one accurately.
Wow.
Yeah. So they couldn't do that. And so then we did under agreement a technology transfer, where I said to them, look, you can use singular value decomposition to predict codes, and you can train it on any specialty, and it'll work, right? And then they hired an external software company
to do it.
Yeah, and then they hired some PhD computer scientist faculty from Northeastern, and then they took that, and then by then I had filed a patent on it, which was issued, and then they made it work for the entire system. Now the patent was kind of interesting because when I wrote it, I was saying, well, I'm using the singular value decomposition to predict codes. And then those will have an arm where they will have a human coder will review a subset of them and for correction. And so then I said this is a self-training. And then in 2014, the term comes out, machine learning. And so I said, hey, what's the machine learning? So I looked it up, and it's the same definition. So then in the back and forth of the patent examiner, I started using the word machine learning. And the patent examiner then objected, said, you can't add new material now that wasn't initially. I had to say, no. It's the same material, I'm just adopting the current term. So we had machine learning up and running before the term was invented, reduced to practice. And so then it worked for the, partner system. And then it became, and at that point, I no longer had a role in it, whether technical of any kind, once they took over it. And then that's Codemetrics and does predictive coding for in
Wow.
excess of 200 academic medical centers.
Wow. And today, if a young person had an idea or something extraordinary like you had back in the days, and they applied for a patent and got it granted, and they were in a setting where it's going to be owned by an institution and they got it relinquished, having that idea, do you think it would have been the way to go to remain in that institution, or would it be better to leave and then start a company with venture capital funding to create something different?
If I were in charge, if I ran the Mass General, I would say the following. I would say that your idea that you want to take the ideas and you commercialize them is not how you maximize your institutional mission.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching, patient care, and research. You maximize it by the people. And so I would say that we want to do is we don't want this to be a new molecule incubator. We want this to be an entrepreneur incubator.
Mm-hmm.
And then if people have ideas, then we would say, we like the idea, we want the person more.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's, between an idea and a product that works in the market, there's tons that you have to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say we are the incubator arm of the Mass General, and our job is to produce the people who will then become the future leaders in the business world, and not only in the academic world.
But they're not doing that
That's
today.
not what they do, but that's what I would do. They as it is, it's kind of limited. The system works best if you can come up with a molecule design that then some pharmaceutical company knows that they need that in their catalog.
Mm-hmm.
And then the person who designs it then doesn't really create the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that system they have, it works if it's a molecule for a known disease, but if it's a new pattern of thinking, that doesn't really work. So if up to me, I'd say, think of yourself as people producers. And if you produce people, they will remember you and they will stay loyal to you, and then they will help you build your programs in ways that you aren't making available to yourself now.
Right.
So I would do that differently if I were in charge. But given that's not the world that we work in, then you have to be ready, if an idea is relinquished, to run it on your own. And you can't. The set of tasks is too great. And the other thing that you need help with is the trust networks, because most ideas are bad ideas. Most ideas of your own are bad ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And you need the way to have them filtered, right, to get the good ones. And if you have a good idea, the valuable part may not be the part that you think is valuable. So you need to have other people see that. And you want it to be people who have skin in the game, but people don't want to put skin in the game unless they know there's something you can trust.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be connected into trust networks. And you need to be curated, so to speak. And there needs to be a curation process, so to speak.
Wow.
So that needs to be out there in the world as well. You need to be connected to those things. And entrepreneurial activity is geographically hyper localized. And part of it is because that's not necessarily where all the ideas are. That's because where the people interested in it get together and they physically meet each other, and then they can develop the trust relationships that they need to get things to cooperate and go. So I would say that I had thought that if you had a really good idea and you proved it was a good idea, that would be enough, but it's not really enough.
Mm-hmm.
You still need to develop the trust relationships with other people who can understand the problem you're trying to solve and how you're trying to solve it, and have other links and resources that you need to get to the final place.
Right.
And so then I would say, if it were up to me, we would come up with a curation/incubation facility for people in the academic world.
Wow. that would be nice.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the system is designed to accommodate that. I do want to double click on something you mentioned earlier. Again, going back to risk, I think, let me ask you this. Why were you not able to just leave neurosurgery? It was such an extraordinary idea. Leave neurosurgery, you got your patent, it's relinquished, and start a company that could be worth billions.
Yeah.
Why were you not able to take that risk?
Here's why. My line of work, pediatric neurosurgery. 6-year-old comes in, vomiting, can't walk, MRI, cerebellar, intraparenchymal cerebellar tumor. You operate on it, post-MRI GTR.
Gross
so,
total resection.
Yeah, gross total resection. In a 6-year-old, they're cured. What other job in the world can you show up with someone who has a disease that they'll die, and you spend one day, they wake up safely and they're cured?
And they're 6 years old, they're going to live to 70, 80, 90.
Yeah. What other job in the world can you do that?
Right.
None, right? And so you have that. And you worked hard to get yourself to be able to do that service, and you can do it. And so it was part of the thing that let me say there's no entrepreneurial risk that's really a risk to be afraid of. I can take it because you know what? I have this. And then the other thing is that disciplines are artifacts of human culture. And problems in nature, there isn't really a necessary reason for them to respect discipline boundaries, right? And so if you really want to make these things better, you need to be able to step across the disciplinary boundaries and see what's in other areas that you can borrow. And our field is one of them. So you can understand that you need to do next code prediction to do billing better, but you would have never understood that if you hadn't been trying to do your job to begin with.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so then doing your main job is is you need that to help you see the holes in the field.
Yes.
And and then you can't really help the satisfaction that you get in taking care of these people and seeing them get better, and you just can't help that.
Right.
So I had that. I said, you know what? It's such a rewarding feeling to have these people wake up better and go home, and that's it. That I can walk away from everything else.
Yeah, it's addictive
Yep.
to get that,
Yeah.
the ability to make a difference in
Yep.
somebody's life in quite an extraordinary
Yep.
way. And the other thing you mentioned, which had to do with using disciplines from other areas to solve problems in your area, and
Yeah.
having the skill set, the drive, the interest to learn and
Yeah.
get information from other areas to solve a problem in neurosurgery or something else. That's actually a very important thing that I think all young neurosurgeons and medical students interested in neurosurgery need to understand. So obviously you've gone on to start other companies
Yeah.
with the same model. You're still with the Mass General.
Yeah.
They haven't changed how they deal
No.
with intellectual property.
No.
And so in the last piece of this conversation, I want you to imagine if you could restart. You're done with residency, and you know that you're going to do extraordinary things with the ideas that you have. How should a young person with that drive and talent approach their career going forward?
I think if I were to do it again, there were a couple of things that I would do. One is I would be more persistent on what we may call making my own luck. And what I mean by that is you come up with next token prediction for billing. Then you need to find people, and you take the people who are right next to you, but they're not necessarily the people with the most aligned interest and resources with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so to make your own luck means that you need to go out and meet more people, events, social gatherings, contact lists, friends, networks of trusted people. You need to expand that more than I knew that you needed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought if you just had a really good idea, everything else would fix itself. That's not correct.
Mm-hmm.
So making your own luck means that you wear out your shoe leather and you just make the rounds and you meet people and you see what their interests are and your interests are, and then you just merge them together. And then I'd have done a much better job about that. The other thing is that if I had my own way, we would reform how the institution operates in this way from within, because the pool of talent that is not really gifted to the world in the way that it could is large, but it's there. And so I would, if I were more skilled and had better bureaucratic and administrative skills, and then I would put myself into a position of influence to change the institutional policy in that way. But it's not an ability that I have. And so the option of saying, well, this is a really good idea, and then they're not going to fully support me to do it, I'm going to walk away and do it my own. For somehow that feels painful. And I have a hard time getting to the reality that that is often the decision that you need to make.
Difficult decision, but that's what you need to make.
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
But it's hard for me to fully acknowledge and endorse that as the correct answer, but in so many cases it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you've obviously been a mentor to me and many neurosurgeons out of the Mass General, and my path is not traditional either. There was a time in my life when I was trying to decide whether to do more research or go to business school, and I came to you and I said, hey, I have this drive about entrepreneurship and business and so forth. The Harvard Business School, one of the best institutions in the world, is right across the river. I can go to business school or go back to the lab and do more research. And I spoke to multiple faculty at the Mass General, and you were the only one who supported me to say, hey, you have to do this and pursue it. And I think that's been a blessing in my life.
Because that's what the academic program really is about. It's not really about academics per se. It's about helping people, it's about supporting people to develop their ability to make a change over a span of years. And it can be entrepreneurial, but it could be in a lab. But it doesn't matter the mode. What matters is the benefit that the world gets from you having a 5, 10, 15, 20, 30-year vision that you think put into place. And for a lot of people, it's through an entrepreneurial thing, right? Because if you do something entrepreneurial and it generates money, you know what? You generated access to healthcare.
Right.
Right? You generated access because you made it more efficient, and by doing that, you make more people be able to get better health care because the health dollar goes more. And so you've generated access, and that is as important a contribution as any.
Right. That's very true, and I can't support that any more than you've said it. So finally, what I want to ask you is, what advice would you give young people, whether who are interested in medicine or neurosurgery or business, in terms of how you decide what path to take with your life and your career?
So I have 4 kids, they're all adults, and none of them went into medicine.
Okay.
And so I said to them all, it's a great field if you love it. And so if you love it, do it. If you don't, then there are other ways to make a good living. So I would say look inside yourself, and if you like the totality, the science, the performance, the challenge, the visual spatial performance skills, if you love those, then do it. And if in the course of those you find a way to do them better that will take a horizon of 5, 10, 15, 20 years to bring it about, then do that. And it may be in an academic lab, but it may not be. It may be designing a new instrument that needs to be amortized, therefore needs to be into the market. Or it may be in new healthcare institutions, ways of providing it. Do it.
Do it. Just do it, but you have to do what you love.
Yep.
And that's the key.
Yeah, because that's how you will excel.
All right. Well, Dr. Butler, this has been an honor and a great time having this conversation. And thank you for all your mentorship over the years.
You're welcome.
All right.